All right, number 4 is fertilizers. What fertilizers are we going to be using in our permaculture farm? And how are we going to get those fertilizers? The more you watch me, the more you're going to realize I am budget. I don't like spending money, so I like to find ways of creating fertilizer, of doing things in a way that we don't spend money. So the first method of fertilization is compost piles. That is a staple in every farm on planet Earth. And if you do want to see a great video on creating compost in 18 days, you can check out this video by Jeff Lawton. He's a permaculture expert. He has courses on his website, and he has so much valuable information on his YouTube channel. Our next form of fertilization is using a composting toilet. So I think no matter what, we're going to have a community composting toilet that is kind of in a central location to all of us within our community. But I also plan on using a composting toilet for myself and my wife. And once again, Jeff Lawton has a video which I do like the idea of implementing, which is using kind of a trash bin and having a system which diverts the P to a different location and the number 2 into the bin. All you do is you have to put sawdust in the bin, and that compost will break down naturally over time, but you're going to have to be dumping it once it's kind of full and letting it fully compost for a long time. I think the minimum is about 9 months for human compost. The next method of fertilization that we plan on using is duck vermicompost. I actually just found this video a while back, and I loved the idea so much that I do think that we're going to be implementing this. I don't know for sure if we're going to have ducks or chickens, but I think we will have one or the other. You can find the link to this video in the description. So basically what they do in this system is they have the ducks on one side of this enclosure, and before they put the ducks in there, they put wood chips all throughout that half of the structure so that when the ducks are pooping, it is getting added into this carbon-rich material so that you have a good balance of carbon and nitrogen, and that is the magic of what makes compost, is a good balance between carbon and nitrogen. And after a few months, after the ducks have fully matted out that whole area and it's starting to compost, they move the ducks to the other side of the enclosure, and then they add worms and worm castings to the previous side where the ducks had just added all of that manure to, and those worms are going to turn all of that into vermicompost. And after they add the worms, they add over a tarp to keep it moist and dark, just like worms like it. And the nice thing about this method is you can really store your fertilizer in a very large area in the ground that you can come to anytime. You don't really need that much effort for this system, which I really like. It's kind of passive, and it produces a lot of vermicompost. And some of the reasons why we also want ducks are because they're good pest control. They eat a lot of different insects, and of course they lay eggs. They lay about the same amount of eggs or more than chickens, which I didn't know until a few months ago. Another source of fertilization is worm castings in bathtubs. So this one is just the worms doing all the work and breaking down your kitchen scraps and anything else that you want to toss in there. And once again, Jeff Lawton has an incredible video on how to do this. Link is in the description. But basically, you're going to put a mesh cover over the bottom outlet of the bathtub so that sediment doesn't get clogged in there and it drains, because you don't want the worms to be drowning in water. And then you place a darker mesh over the top to keep rodents out, to keep the sunlight out, so the worms can come to the top, they can come to the surface and eat your scraps. And I do plan on probably having multiple bathtubs with vermicompost. Another method of fertilization is Jadam organic farming. The YouTube channel Nature's Always Right has this video that you can find in the description about how to make Jadam liquid fertilizer, which is extremely simple. I can describe it all right now. You basically get a bucket, you put anything that you want in that bucket that is organic. It could be leaves, it could be fruits, it could be kitchen scraps, anything that you want in there that is going to break down. You fill it with water, you put the lid on, and you let nature do its thing. It creates the most disgusting thing on planet Earth. I promise you, It smells like death, but I have used it myself, and man, oh man, it creates some incredibly resilient and bountiful harvests. So a couple reasons why I really love this as a fertilizer is, one, it's incredibly budget. You really just need a bucket, and then you can toss whatever plants, whatever scraps you want in there. And what it does is it boosts microbial activity in the soil, and that's because it's kind of fermented over the course of time. With Jadam liquid fertilizer, it gets more potent over time, right? So if it's months old or years old, it's going to be extremely potent. So you need very, very little of it the longer it goes in breaking down that organic matter, because all of that organic matter that's in there is getting fermented, it's getting dissolved, and all of that biology that's happening in there, it makes those nutrients more available to your plants so they can uptake it very quickly. Another really cool thing about this fertilization method is that you can kind of make your own sort of ratios of NPK or any other elements that you want to focus on, like calcium or magnesium, by putting those different types of plants that are rich in those things in the bucket. So if you want to make a super calcium rich fertilizer for whatever reason, you can put a bunch of dandelions in there. If you want to make a super potassium rich fertilizer, put a bunch of banana peels in there. If you want a super balanced fertilizer, you can put a blend of a bunch of different things in there. But it's nice to be able to do that, because for potassium, that's for when plants are in their fruiting stage. They need a lot of potassium to make fruits, to make vegetables, to make roots. You need potassium. So in that stage of development for the plants, you can use more of a potassium-rich Jadam liquid fertilizer. You can have multiple buckets that are kind of tailored to those different plants. Another form of Jadam fertilization is JMS, which stands for Jadam Microorganism Solution. And this method is a way of inoculating substrate like rice with indigenous microorganisms. And the reason why that's so important is because the indigenous microorganisms, the ones that are indigenous to your landscape and your environment, are going to be the most beneficial ones that you want to be putting into your soil. And you can really multiply these indigenous microorganisms through this system in your soil, and that's going to be extremely beneficial for the soil health and longevity within your climate. Another system of fertilization that we plan on using on our permaculture farm is mulching, or chopping and dropping. I kind of see those as the same thing. It's where you take things like weeds or extremely prolific, fast-growing trees or shrubs or anything like that. You chop those down, or you chop off the leaves of those things down, and you use that as a mulch, as something that is going to be organic and break down into the soil and add that microbiology back to the soil. Those worms, those nematodes, all those things are going to come to the surface to break these things down, the fungi, and that is going to be the most beneficial thing to help your root structure be resilient and have access to the mycorrhizal fungi, which I talk about in other videos, which is so important, because when your plants are in a symbiotic relationship with mycorrhizal fungi, it's a relationship where the fungi provides the nutrients that the plant is deficient in. It provides the water if the plant needs water, because the fungi wants the sugars that the plant is producing, and the plant wants the nutrients and the water that the fungi is providing. And you can facilitate that by chopping and dropping sticks, twigs, dried leaves, other carbon-rich material around your trees especially, but also around your perennials and your herbs and all your other plants. So some of these plants I'll list just really quickly that I'm planning to implement on my permaculture farm. These include comfrey, which is a kind of a micronutrient powerhouse. It kind of has everything. It grows extremely fast. I'd probably have it in my greenhouse because it kind of likes warmer temperatures. We've got sunchokes. We've got Canna musifolia, which is a plant that grows extremely fast, that produces a lot of biomass, which you can chop and drop. And it also produces edible tubers, so that's a plus. You've got borage, which is a very versatile herb to have around that grows extremely fast. It attracts pollinators and you can chop and drop it. You got fenugreek, which is a nitrogen fixer, which grows extremely fast. And every part of fenugreek is edible. We've got mallow, which is kind of a drought tolerant perennial with edible leaves and flowers. We've got red clover, which is probably something we were going to be using as a nitrogen fixing cover crop, but it is also edible. We've got alfalfa, which is a high protein legume that grows really well in most climates. We've got sorghum, which is an extremely fast growing type of grass that produces a grain crop that you can use as flour, but it's also an incredible source of biomass you can chop and drop. It's got a lot of water content inside of it. You can also use it kind of as a sugar cane. The inside of it is really sweet. If you want to learn more about sorghum Sudan grass, I highly recommend looking at Green Willow Permaculture's channel. He talks all about it. He's got amazing tips on sorghum, and he grows a lot of it. We've also got vetch, which is kind of that standard classic that people use as a cover crop because it grows extremely fast, produces a lot of biomass really fast, and fixes nitrogen in the soil. Another method of fertilization is using biochar. There's a lot of videos out there on how to make biochar. I'm sure I'll make one at some point. But for now, David the Good made a video on how to make biochar. It's extremely simple. You basically make the hottest fire you can make, trying to limit the amount of oxygen in that fire using sticks, twigs, and anything else that's going to burn, that's organic. And then once that's kind of burning and burning extremely hot, you're going to put it out with water before it turns to ash so that it's more like coal, hence the name biochar, right? And the important thing with biochar is that you inoculate it before putting it into the soil. Inoculate meaning you want it to be full of life already. Because biochar is so great because it's got all these little micro folds inside of it that is kind of housing for a bunch of different bacteria. And that bacteria is extremely useful in the soil. So you don't want to put it in there before inoculating it because then that would kind of draw in the bacteria that's already in the soil and deplete it from the soil. So if you inoculate it in something like worm castings or compost and let it sit in that for a while before you put it into your soil, it's going to accumulate a lot of that microbiology and then imbue that into the soil. And the last fertilizer that we plan on using, at least at this moment in time, is Steve Solomon's Gold. Once again, I heard about this from David the Good. He's got a video on the recipe and the instructions for how to put this micronutrient solution together. And I'll just put that on the screen here, and feel free to pause the video and take a photo if you'd like. We've got the ingredients here for a 10-foot by 10-foot bed. And then we've got the instructions right here. And that's it for all of our different forms of fertilization. If you like the content, like and subscribe. It would mean a lot. I'm going to be putting out content like this a lot over the coming years. And if you want to see the other 4 videos in this series, you can check that out in the link right here. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.